It started as just another quiet afternoon in Willow Creek, the kind where the rustling leaves and distant laughter children at play created a comforting hum of normalcy. But then, barking, loud, relentless, and filled with urgency. At first, most people ignored it. Dogs bark all the time, at squirrels, at passing cars, at nothing at all. But this was different. The barks weren't random or playful. They were rhythmic, almost desperate, coming from a single dog standing rigid in front of a parked car on the side of the road. An elderly couple on their evening stroll slowed, exchanging puzzled glances. A jogger pulled out her earbuds, frowning as she noticed the dog's agitation. Even children playing nearby hesitated, sensing something unusual. The dog, a medium-sized mutt with scruffy fur, perhaps a stray, stood its ground, barking furiously at the trunk of a faded blue sedan. Its tail was stiff, ears pinned back, body vibrating with tension. For over 10 minutes, the barking continued. People watched, murmuring among themselves, but unwilling to intervene. Was it just a territorial stray? Did it smell something inside the car? Then something strange happened. The dog, which had been solely focused on the vehicle, suddenly turned and bolted toward a passing woman, nearly tripping her. She gasped, stepping back as the dog barked at her, then back at the car, then at her again, its movements frantic, as if trying to communicate. The woman hesitated, glancing around for an owner. Seeing none, she followed the dog's gaze to the car. Something about the way the animal moved, the way it refused to leave, sent a prickle of unease down her spine. A gut feeling told her this wasn't normal. She pulled out her phone and hesitated before dialing. The police had more important things to handle than a barking dog. But then she looked into the mutt's wide, pleading eyes. Something was wrong. Moments later, the call went through. Yes, hi. I think you should send someone over. There's a dog in a car. I don't know how to explain it, but something feels off. The dispatcher asked for details. The woman provided the location and waited, still watching the dog. It had returned to its post, paws planted firmly, tail unmoving, eyes locked on the trunk. When the first patrol car arrived minutes later, 2 officers stepped out, scanning the scene. One of them, Officer Daniels, frowned at the dog, which had now turned its barking on them. Guess we're dealing with a canine detective, his partner muttered. Daniels sighed, approaching the car cautiously. All right, let's see what's going on here. He had no idea what he was about to find. Officer Daniels had dealt with plenty of strange calls in his years on the force, but this was a first. A dog barking at a parked car? It hardly seemed like an emergency. Yet as he approached, a nagging instinct told him not to dismiss it so quickly. The dog, dirty, collarless, possibly a stray, stood firm, staring at him with an intensity that sent a ripple of unease through his chest. It barked again, snapping at the air as if trying to force him to understand something. His partner, Officer Mitchell, circled the car, inspecting it with a practiced eye. No broken windows, no visible damage, he noted. License plates intact. Could just be an abandoned vehicle. Daniels nodded, pulling out his notepad. Let's run the plates, see if we can find the owner. As Mitchell radioed dispatch for a check, Daniels turned his attention back to the dog. It had stopped barking now, as if waiting to see what they would do. It let out a low whine, pawing at the trunk. Something inside twisted. All right, he muttered, crouching down. What are you trying to tell me, buddy? The dog whined again. The vehicle was an older model sedan, dusty but not filthy, as if it had been sitting here for a while, but hadn't been completely abandoned. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside. Cars registered to a Michael Bowers, Mitchell reported. No outstanding warrants, no reported theft. Lives about 2 miles from here. Want me to knock on some doors, see if anyone recognizes a name? Daniels hesitated. Yeah, but first, he reached the car door handle, testing it. Locked? Of course. Mitchell exhaled sharply. Look, unless we have reason to believe there's a crime being committed, we can't just break into someone's car because a dog's throwing a fit. Daniels knew he was right. Protocol mattered. But something about this situation gnawed at him. Then, just as he was about to step away, he noticed something. A faint, almost imperceptible smell wafting from the car. Not strong, but distinct. Acrid, metallic, blood. His stomach clenched. Daniels straightened. Call it in. We might have something here. Mitchell didn't argue. He radioed for backup, reporting a suspicious vehicle with possible evidence of foul play. They were still bound by procedure, but with the odor and the dog persistence, they had enough justification to investigate further. As they waited, Daniels knocked on the car's window. No response. He tried peering inside, but the tint was too dark. His pulse quickened. The dog let out another sharp bark. Then a sound, barely audible, made Daniels freeze. A muffled thump. It had come from inside the trunk. Mitchell heard it too. They exchanged a glance, their earlier skepticism vanishing. Daniels' hand went to his belt. We're opening it. The dog backed up, but its eyes never left the trunk. It seemed to know whatever was inside wasn't good. The backup officers were still minutes away, but Daniels wasn't waiting. He just hoped they weren't already too late. Daniels' pulse pounded in his ears as he reached for his baton. His instincts screamed that time was running out. Mitchell glanced around. A few bystanders had gathered at a distance, murmuring, their curiosity piqued by the growing police presence. The last thing they needed was an audience if this turned into something worse than a welfare check. Step back. Mitchell called out, waving people away. Most obeyed, but their eyes stayed glued to the scene. The dog whined, its paws scraping against the pavement as it moved anxiously around the car. Daniels squared his shoulders and took a deep breath. All right, we're popping the trunk. Mitchell gave a terse nod, reaching for the Slim Jim from their squad car. Let's hope Bowers just forgot his groceries in here. Neither of them believed that. As Mitchell worked the lock, Daniels kept his hand near his holster, eyes scanning the area. His nerves were coiled tight. This was the kind of situation that could go sideways fast. The lock resisted at first, but then, click, the moment the trunk released, a stench hit them like a physical blow. The unmistakable, putrid mix of sweat, fear, and something far worse. Daniels took an instinctive step back, hand now fully gripping his gun. Mitchell cursed under his breath. The trunk creaked open, revealing a sight that sent a chill straight down Daniels' spine. A person, bound, gagged, barely conscious. A woman. Her skin was pale, streaked with grime and dried blood. Her wrists were raw where the rope had bitten into them, and her breathing was shallow. She flinched at the sudden flood of light, but didn't make a sound. Jesus, Mitchell muttered, snapping into action. We need EMS now. Daniels didn't hesitate. He holstered his weapon and lunged forward, working quickly to free her restraints. Ma'am, can you hear me? His voice was firm but gentle, a difficult balance in moments like these. Her eyelids fluttered. A weak, raspy sound slipped past her lips, a whisper of something unintelligible. Daniels leaned in. What? Her lips barely moved. H.E. Her body trembled violently. But before she could say anything else, her eyes rolled back, and she went limp. She's in shock, Mitchell said grimly, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. Pulse is weak, but she's alive. The dog whined, pushing forward, sniffing the air as if confirming the woman was still breathing. Daniel swallowed hard, adrenaline still pumping. Whoever had done this had left her to die, and they might not be far. He straightened, scanning the area. Mitchell, get the perimeter secured. We need everyone, detectives, crime scene, the whole damn department on this. Someone did this, and they're going to know we're coming for them. Mitchell was already on the radio, calling in forensics and an ambulance. The dog, now silent, sat beside the open trunk, staring at the woman. Daniels had no idea how it had found her, but one thing was clear. If not for this stray, she wouldn't have survived much longer. He exhaled slowly, the reality of the moment sinking in. This wasn't just a rescue. This was the beginning of something much bigger, and it was far from over. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Sirens piercing the air as paramedics rushed to the unconscious woman. Daniel stepped back to let them work, watching as they carefully lifted her from the trunk. Severe dehydration, possible internal injuries. one of the paramedics murmured, shining a light into her eyes. She needs a hospital. Now. Daniels nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead. Who was she? How long had she been in that trunk? And, more importantly, who had put her there? The dog sat motionless beside the patrol car, still watching, as if refusing to leave until it knew she was safe. Mitchell finished, briefing the responding officers. Forensics is en route. They'll sweep the car, check for prints. The registration comes back to Michael Bowers, but there's no sign of him. Daniels frowned. No history with the law? Mitchell shook his head. Nothing that stands out. A couple of speeding tickets, but that's it. Then where the hell is he? The paramedics loaded the woman onto a stretcher, securing an oxygen mask over her face. As they lifted her into the ambulance, Daniel stepped forward, his voice firm but gentle. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" Her eyelids fluttered, and for a moment he thought she might be slipping back into unconsciousness. But then her lips moved. "Elena?" Daniels leaned closer. "Lena? Lena what?" She swallowed, struggling to focus. "Crawford." Mitchell's head snapped up. "Wait, Crawford." Daniels caught the flicker of recognition in his partner's eyes. "You know her?" Mitchell exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "Lena Crawford. She was reported missing a week ago. Her fiancé filed a report. Said she never came home after work. A missing person. And now she'd turned up in the trunk of a stranger's car." Daniel's gut tightened. "And this Michael Bowers, any connection to her?" Mitchell was already pulling up the missing persons report on his phone. "Not that I can see. They don't share an address. No known ties. But if she was in his car, we need to find him fast." Daniels nodded grimly. He turned to one of the officers on scene. "Get an APB out on Bowers. If he's not the victim here, he's our #1 suspect." The officer nodded and moved to relay the order. Meanwhile, forensics had arrived and begun processing the vehicle. One of the technicians, a wiry man named Carter, crouched near the trunk, carefully lifting prints from the edges. "Check for blood," Daniels instructed. "Something tells me she wasn't the first one in there." Carter gave him a sharp look. "You think this is part of something bigger?" Daniels didn't answer right away. He looked at Lena, now disappearing inside the ambulance. Something about this case felt wrong. Not just a random kidnapping. Not just a violent crime of opportunity. Something calculated. Something deliberate. And as the paramedics pulled away, sirens wailing, he had the sinking feeling that they were only scratching the surface of a much darker truth. The night had settled over the city, but for Daniels and Mitchell, the case was just beginning. The crime scene had been secured, the vehicle towed for forensic analysis, and Lena Crawford was now in the hands of the hospital's trauma team. But Michael Bowers was still missing. Daniels sat behind the wheel of their squad car, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel as Mitchell tapped furiously on the in-car computer. "All right," Mitchell muttered, eyes narrowing. "Bowers' last known address is a small rental house on Oak Ridge Drive. No recent activity on his financials. No credit card use. No ATM withdrawals in the past 48 hours. Daniels frowned. Could be running. Or... He didn't finish the thought. Mitchell glanced at him. "You think he's dead, don't you?" Daniels exhaled through his nose. A guy with no record suddenly turns up linked to a missing woman's stuff in his trunk? Either he's hiding or someone doesn't want him found. Mitchell nodded grimly. "Well, let's see if he's at home." They pulled away from the scene, the dog still watching as they drove off. Animal control had been called. But Daniels had a feeling that wasn't the last they'd see of the stray. Bowers' house. The rental was a one-story, unremarkable house with a peeling blue door and an overgrown front yard. No lights inside. No car in the driveway. Daniels killed the engine. Looks abandoned. Mitchell checked his gun. Only one way to find out. They approached cautiously, the crunch of gravel under their boots the only sound. Mitchell knocked. "Michael Bowers?" "Police." Silence. Daniels peered through the window. The living room was dark, but something felt off. A slight shift in the air, a sense of something waiting just beyond sight. Then a noise. A dull thud from inside. Both officers exchanged a look before Daniels reached for the doorknob. It was locked, but the door creaked slightly under the pressure. Mitchell didn't wait. Screw this. He stepped back and drove his boot into the door. The wood splintered, the lock giving way. They entered with guns drawn. The smell hit them first. Not just dust and neglect. Something heavier. Faint but unmistakable. Decay. Daniel's stomach tightened. They moved room by room, clearing each space methodically. The living room was untouched, the kitchen cluttered but unremarkable. The bathroom empty, then the bedroom. The sight made Mitchell curse under his breath. Michael Bowers was there, or what was left of him. The body lay sprawled on the bed, partially covered by a sheet. His face was frozen in a grotesque expression of pain, eyes open but unseeing. Dried blood streaked the pillow. A single gunshot wound to the chest. Daniel's jaw clenched. Well, that answers that. Mitchell ran a hand through his hair. Whoever did this, they wanted to shut him up. Daniels nodded slowly, scanning the room. The bed, the walls. Everything suggested he had been killed here, not moved post-mortem. No signs of struggle. Execution style. Mitchell pointed to the bedside table. Look at that. Daniels followed his gaze. A single piece of paper neatly folded. A note. Daniels picked it up, his eyes narrowing as he read the words scrawled in shaky handwriting. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. His blood ran cold. This wasn't just a murder. This was a cover-up. And they were just getting started. Daniel stared at the note in his gloved hands, the scrawled words burning into his mind. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. It sounded like a confession, but not from a guilty man. More like a desperate plea from someone caught in something far bigger than he could handle. Mitchell exhaled sharply. So, what are we looking at here? Bowers kidnaps Lena, stashes her in the trunk, then comes home and, what? Feels guilty and offs himself. Daniels shook his head. No way. One gunshot, close range, no signs of a struggle. That wasn't suicide. Mitchell crossed his arms, which means someone wanted him dead, and wanted it to look clean. Daniel scanned the room again, his instincts tingling. Something was missing, something they hadn't seen yet. Then he noticed a laptop, sitting on the small desk in the corner. The screen was dark, but the charging light blinked, a quiet pulse in the dimly lit room. Daniels exchanged a glance with Mitchell before stepping forward. He lifted the lid, and immediately the screen flickered to life. It was locked, but the last page left open before the system went idle sent a jolt of electricity through him. An email draft. The subject line, I made a mistake. Daniel's pulse quickened. We need cyber forensics on this, now. Mitchell was already dialing dispatch. Yeah, we need a tech team out of Oak Ridge Drive, priority 1. Daniels barely heard him. His focus remained on the laptop, his mind racing. Bowers had known something. Something that had gotten him killed. And Lena Crawford had been left in his trunk. Had he been trying to save her? Or was she just another piece in a much larger puzzle? Then Mitchell's voice cut through his thoughts. Daniels. The hospital just called. Daniels turned. Lena? Mitchell nodded grimly. She's awake, and she's asking for us. Daniels and Mitchell moved quickly through the hospital corridors, their footsteps echoing against the sterile floors. The weight of the case pressed down on them. Bowers was dead. Lena had survived, but the truth still felt just out of reach. A nurse guided them to Lena's room. She was awake, propped up by pillows, and four in her arm. Though pale and weak, her eyes were sharp. When she saw them, something flickered across her face. Relief, but also fear. Daniels pulled up a chair beside her. Lena, I know you've been through hell, but we need to know what happened. Why were you in that trunk? Her breath hitched. She swallowed hard, as if reliving it was just as terrifying as the ordeal itself. It's not what you think, she whispered. Mitchell leaned in. Then tell us. What happened? She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Then she spoke. I was investigating something. A company, Vericor Industries. Daniels frowned. Never heard of it. You wouldn't have, she said. It's a front. On the surface, it's a research lab. But in reality, they're running illegal drug trials. People have died. Mitchell let out a low whistle. And you found proof? Lena nodded weakly. Enough to expose them. I was going to meet with a contact who worked there, a whistleblower. But before I could, someone grabbed me. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I woke up, I was in that trunk. Daniels exhaled sharply. And you think Bowers was involved? A pause. Then she shook her head. No, I think he was trying to help me. Mitchell blinked. Wait, you're saying Bowers was innocent? Lena swallowed. Not innocent, exactly. I think he was being used. Maybe he didn't know the full extent of what he was involved in. Maybe he thought he was just following orders. She looked at Daniels, her expression haunted. But he must have realized the truth. And when he did, they killed him. A chilling silence filled the room. Daniels leaned back, the pieces clicking into place. Bowers had been the middleman. He might not have known what he was getting into, but by the time he figured out, it was too late. And Lena? She was supposed to disappear. Mitchell ran a hand down his face. So Vericor's behind this? Lena hesitated. I don't have concrete proof, but I overheard something when I was locked up. A name. Someone they all seem to be afraid of. Daniels leaned forward. Who? She took a slow, shaky breath. Dr. Julia Mercer. The room felt colder. Daniels exchanged a look with Mitchell, who was already pulling up his phone. Mercer, Mitchell murmured. Scrolling. Head of Vericor Industries. No criminal record. No red flags, but he exhaled sharply. Yeah, that's a guy who's got too much power for someone who's supposedly clean. Daniels turned back to Lena. You're not safe here. If they tried to kill you once, they'll try again. Lena nodded. I know. Daniels stood. Then let's make sure they don't get the chance. As they walked out of the hospital room, the case had shifted. This wasn't just about a missing woman anymore. This was about something much bigger. And Daniels had no intention of letting it go.